Well, now that I've wrapped up talking about all the numbered Star Wars movies, let's get back into Middle-earth. The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug. Now, The Desolation of Smaug is a movie that I loved in the theater. When I saw this movie when it came out, I was obsessed with it. I appreciate the first Hobbit movie for what it was, although the weird frame rate gimmick that they did with the first release of the first Hobbit movie, it did kind of take me out of it. It didn't make me really get into that movie as much as I would later on. But when this second movie came out, I was into it. I loved all the action. I loved the characters. I loved the slightly darker story that they were telling in this chapter. This for me was a lot closer to what I really liked about the original Lord of the Rings movies, and watching it again, there's a lot that I still really enjoy about this. Now, granted, in that in-between time from the first time I watched it to when I watched it just recently, I have read the book. I didn't read the book before the movies came out. It just wasn't on my radar back then, but I have read the book, and so now I have a little bit of a different appreciation for these movies and how they adapt certain things from the book. And I still feel like even though this movie does have a few more things that are a little indulgent and a little bit not necessary as far as what's in the book, I still feel like this movie's a lot of fun. And this movie starts off pretty strong. It starts off with a flashback in true Lord of the Rings fashion. All these movies start off with some kind of flashback or some kind of little scene that kind of loosely connects to what's going on in the world, gives us a little bit of character interactions that we don't normally get to see with the adventure at hand. And this movie shows us the first encounter between Gandalf and Thorin Oakenshield. He's at the Prancing Pony, he's kind of on edge, and then Gandalf sits down and introduces himself and introduces the idea of this quest that we've been on. And it's a fine way to open the movie, but the movie really gets going properly when we flash forward about a year, I think, and we pick up pretty much right where the last movie left off. They just were carried by the eagles out of danger from the orcs, but the orcs are still on their tail, and they're here more or less in the middle of the wilderness, and they see this bear thing, this huge monstrous bear that's bigger than any bear that Bilbo's ever seen before, and they run and take refuge inside of Beorn's house. And Beorn is a skin changer. He's in the book. He's this huge man that shapeshifts into a bear at night, or I don't know if it's just at night or if it's sometimes during the day, but he's a skin changer. He shapeshifts into a bear. That's really all you need to know. And the antics with him and the dwarves are right out of the book. This movie also, like the first movie, takes a lot of stuff from the book. It continues what the first movie did and just take all these little mini adventures that the book strings along and just strings them along in the movie, and they're really entertaining to see. You see that Beorn is no fan of dwarves, but he hates orcs more, so he kind of reluctantly agrees to help out the dwarves. You see Gandalf try to negotiate with them, and the dwarves kind of bumbling their way through it. And it's fun, it's cute. It's a good way to ease you back into the world of this movie with something a little lighter before we get into Mirkwood. Mirkwood is this kind of cursed forest. It's real gross looking. Everything's kind of gray. It's not visually all that interesting, admittedly. It does look kind of drab and bland, but I guess that's kind of the point. So I can't really fault the movie for that, because it's supposed to look kind of sickly and evil, like it's been corrupted by something, some dark forces. And we find out very quickly that there's spiders here, and this is the scene from the book where Bilbo has to fight off the spiders. It's where he gets the name Sting from for his sword, and that's all handled really well. I like that we get to hear the spiders talk when he puts the ring on, because animals talking like that is something that happens a lot in the Hobbit book, but doesn't happen nearly as often in the Lord of the Rings. So I appreciate that little bit of Hobbit flair that this movie wasn't afraid to bring in. And that leads you right into stuff with the Elven King, which they do expand on in this movie. And I feel like as far as expansions that these movies have made to accommodate 3 movies instead of just 1, or the original 2 that they were going to go with, the stuff with Legolas and Evangeline Lilly's Tauriel, they do work in this movie. Now, I don't think it works nearly as well in the next movie, but at least for this movie, it makes sense why they're there, because Legolas is the son of the Elven King, and the Elven King's in the book, but Legolas isn't really in the book, so having Legolas not be there when he's clearly alive during that time would be weird. It does help tie in better with Lord of the Rings. Orlando Bloom still looks great as Legolas. He does a great job in this movie. Still has some great action scenes like we know him to do from Lord of the Rings. And whenever he's on screen, it's good fan service. I like seeing him. And it's not the kind of fan service that distracts from the quest at hand. And Evangeline Lilly as Tauriel is the other additional character that probably didn't need to be in this movie, but it does make sense. Evangeline Lilly, first of all, just looks born to play an elf. I think everyone knew that she was going to be an elf as soon as she was cast. She's this tall, slender woman that can clearly do action really well, so of course she would be an elf. Well, I do have kind of mixed feelings about her relationship in this movie with one of the dwarves. I think it's Keeley in this that she has kind of an interest in, and he has an interest in her. And while in this movie it doesn't bloom into a full-blown romance, there is some attraction there, and there is some intrigue there as to where that might go. And I feel like in this one it's handled decent enough. Is it necessary for the story at hand, and does it drag out the runtime a bit? Yeah. Is it accurate to the book? Not at all. There's no way that would happen. But it's an interesting little subplot and does do something that I wish these movies did more of, and it helps you get to know these dwarves as individuals. Because we know Thorin Oakenshield, he's the guy with the backstory. He's the guy that has a real axe to grind against the elves here. He kind of spits in the face of the Elven King, which doesn't do him any favors and is kind of a bonehead move the way it's framed here, because he's really in no position to say anything bad to the Elven King, because all of his friends are locked up. He's got nothing to negotiate with, so he might as well play nice with the Elven King, promise that he'll get his little jewels when he retakes the mountain, and he can always change his mind later. We see that happen in the next movie. He turns his back on everybody and gets corrupted by the gold, so I don't see why he couldn't have just promised that now. In fact, in this movie, we see him promise riches to the people of Lake Town later on in this movie, and that's before any of the gold corruption really gets to his head. So the way it plays out here doesn't really make sense, but at the same time, given his backstory and given the history with the elves and this Elven King specifically, I can understand where he's coming from, even though tactically it probably wasn't the best move. But we also, over the course of these first two movies, get to know Balin. He serves as Thorin's elderly counsel. He's the oldest, and he serves as kind of the wise old dwarf of the group. He's a pretty well fleshed out character too, and now we get Keeley with this love interest, so we're starting to see a bit more of his character, and his brother Feely. To a lesser degree, we're starting to differentiate because they are brothers and they're kind of a package, and that they care for each other very deeply. So you do get a little bit more of Keeley by extension. But a lot of these other dwarves, we still don't really know anything about. We can only really tell them apart just at a glance because of the very over-the-top designs of each of these dwarves, which are pretty amazing when you really sit down and appreciate all the work that went into crafting these 13 original designs for dwarves to make them look different, but still make them all look dwarvish. That's all well and good, but personality-wise, we still know very little about these other dwarves. And at the end of this movie, we still don't really know much. There's another one, Gloin, who's the father of Gimli, who we'll meet in Lord of the Rings, but don't really know much about his personality. And all the other ones are just glorified extras, really. They don't really get many scenes or lines of dialogue to differentiate them, which is kind of sad, because over the course of this movie, Bilbo does get a lot of scenes to interact with the dwarves. He seems to only really interact with Thorin and Balin, and maybe he'll have a line or two with some other ones, but he doesn't really get any interesting scenes with them. And because Bilbo is the outsider of the group, this would have been a great opportunity to get him to have some conversations and get to know each dwarf on an individual level, so that by the end of this franchise, we really feel like this has become a family, that we've met all 13 dwarves and really get a handle on what they're all about and what they each bring to this mission. And that's just kind of a missed opportunity here. But that being said, Bilbo here, once again played by Martin Freeman, is still amazing as Bilbo Baggins. And here he gets even more opportunities to show why he is a valued member of this team, which we see from the very first encounter with the spiders in Mirkwood. You see him slashing these spiders to bits, rescuing all the other dwarves, and then when they all get captured by the Elven King, he's the one that uses the ring. He becomes invisible and he helps them escape through the barrels, which once again straight out of the book. Although when they're actually in the barrels and they're going down the river, the book says it's pretty uneventful. It's just smooth sailing until they get to the barge. Here, they turn that into a full-blown action sequence, and it is, for the most part, pretty awesome to look at. There are some dumb scenes, and it is indicative of a lot of the action scenes in these Hobbit movies. They do tend to go on for a little bit too long and include some moments that are just a little bit too cartoony, over-the-top, kind of caricatures of an action scene rather than a more grounded Lord of the Rings style action scene that had a clear purpose to it. Here, some of the CGI can go a little over the top. For me personally, I don't really have an issue with them fighting on all these barrels and the orcs and the elves all fighting above them. And a lot of how that's staged is actually pretty awesome. But when you see Bomber go up on a barrel and he's bouncing and he's squishing all these orcs and he's rolling, and then he pops out like a spinning top and just starts killing them. That's where, for me, it gets a little over the top. I wish they just kind of reined it in a little bit more, kept it in the pocket of just being there on the river and just praying that they don't catch a stray arrow to the noggin. And my other thought about these action sequences as I'm watching these movies progress, I'm continually shocked that none of these 13 dwarves ever die or take any damage, with one exception, and that is Keely in this movie does catch a Morgul arrow to the leg, and it's poisoned, and it looks like he's gonna die, and there's this whole subplot where Evangeline Lilly's trying to use some elf magic to heal him while the rest of the dwarves are off fighting Smaug in the mountain towards the third act of this movie. But aside from that, there are still several moments when these dwarves tempt fate more than they probably should. And part of me would kind of like to see Peter Jackson take the risk of actually killing off some of these dwarves before they reach the mountain. Because really, you have 13 dwarves in this movie. And in a book, it's very easy to just kind of read that and be like, okay, 13 dwarves make it to Erebor. Somehow all manage to survive this incredibly dangerous quest, whatever. But when you actually see it on screen, it really does kind of beg the question of, okay, how did all 13 dwarves survive all these very perilous activities? That's a pretty big group for none of them to get picked off by the hordes of orcs and spiders and goblins and who knows what other creatures they're going to encounter on this quest. Especially considering, like I said before, the movies don't really develop a lot of these background dwarves into interesting characters. So if Ori or Nori or Bifur or Bofer or Oin somehow were to bite it on the way over there, I don't think anybody would have really cared, and if anything, it would have upped the stakes, because now there's a real sense of danger that our numbers are dwindling and there's less now than there was before. Maybe 13 could have taken on the dragon, but 10 or 12 or 9 maybe will not be enough. So it does kind of raise the stakes, put everyone a little bit on edge. And of course, they'll have to grieve the ones they lost, because even though the audience doesn't really feel that attached to some of those background dwarves, the other dwarves definitely feel attached, so there's an opportunity, a bit more drama, a bit more characterization for some of these dwarves. So I don't know, on the one hand, it does kind of go against the way the book is written, but at the same time, this is an adaptation, and sometimes you got to take chances like that, and I feel like that would have really helped these movies feel like they have some weight and they don't just feel like CGI cartoons all the time. But after they escape the Elven King on their barrels, they get to the Bargemen, who, in another change from the book that they took a chance on that I think pays off really well, they combine the character of the Bargemen in the book with Bard the Bowman, who plays a pretty significant role in the book. And I won't spoil it here because it doesn't happen in this movie, but he's the man from Lake Town that kind of has to step up and be a leader and do what must be done, and I'll leave it at that. And he's played by Luke Evans here, and by combining those two characters, we get more opportunities to get to know Bard, and the way this movie expands on his story, we get to see him interact with the dwarves more. We get to see his standing in Lake Town with all the other people, with the leadership. He's got a family, he's got 3 kids, he's a widower, and he's actually handled pretty well. You really do like this guy. You understand his plight, you understand his struggle, his sense of danger when these dwarves come in, because he knows what that entails, that if they wake up the dragon, it could put Lake Town, everything he loves, in jeopardy. Just like what happened years ago with the town of Dale, he doesn't want that kind of desolation to come to Lake Town. So there is some conflict there, and there's some really good character moments. I really appreciate what this movie did with his character, with Lake Town as a whole, with how the dwarves interact there. One big exception being Stephen Fry as the master and his little henchman Alfred, who just feel like such over-the-top cartoons of bad guys in this type of movie. And granted, the book doesn't really paint the Master in a great light, but the book also doesn't really say a lot about the Master either. So there's a real opportunity here to make him a three-dimensional character and maybe add some nuance to that character. But no, here Peter Jackson went the complete opposite direction, made him total farcical comic relief, and made Alfred one of the most annoying and detestable fictional characters this side of Jar Jar Binks. It actually makes me wish that I was looking at Radagast the Brown again, which he is also in this movie. Him and Gandalf go on a little side mission like we saw before, and here they're investigating the graves of the 9 servants of Sauron, because one of them he encountered in the last movie with a Morgul blade, and it was one of the 9. So here they're investigating the tombs to make sure they're all still dead, and turns out they're not. All the tombs have been opened, which causes even more red flags to go up. So then that little quest takes them to Dol Guldur, where it's undoubtedly a trap. There's a lot of orcs there. There's a spell of concealment around there. The necromancer's there. Gandalf doesn't really think the necromancer's a human anymore because there's no way a human can summon that kind of dark evil and malice, and he suspects it's Sauron. And it's here where we get the big reveal with the eye and Sauron stepping out of the eye and the thing that's been memed 100 times. Yeah, that happens here, and Gandalf sees all of that on display, and he's like, holy crap, I thought I knew what I was getting into, and it's way over my head. I need some backup now. That's really kind of the last we see of him in this movie. We don't really get the conclusion of that story until the next movie. It kind of ends on a bit of a cliffhanger, although not nearly as much of a cliffhanger as the main plot will be. So let's get back to our dwarf friends, because after they encounter the Master and Alfred, and like I said before, they promise them riches so that they'll be sent on their way up to the mountain. They get up to the mountain, and Bilbo goes into the mountain to steal the Arkenstone, and it's here where finally we get to see Smaug in all of his Benedict Cumberbatch glory. And the scenes with Smaug and Bilbo in the Caverns of Erebor are ripped straight out of the book. It's great tension, it's great dialogue. It actually kind of reminds me of the Riddles in the Dark sequence with Gollum in the last movie, because that was also ripped straight out of the book, and it was kind of an isolated scene with Bilbo and this evil, corrupted obstacle that he needs to riddle with and outsmart and find a way without using direct force to get out of that situation. And it's the same thing here with Bilbo and Smaug. He clearly can't fight his way out of this scenario, so just like with Gollum, he uses his words. He flatters him, he uses riddles and wordplay to keep him on edge. And it's just a really captivating sequence here. And eventually the other dwarves do go in, and we get a prolonged action scene with them fighting Smaug and turning on the furnaces and building this big gold statue. And while that's all really cool, and every scene where we get to see Smaug in these movies are fantastic, and I wouldn't really want to cut it for anything, because the animation, the character design, the way Cumberbatch's voice is modulated to feel like it's coming out of this big dragon, it all just looks so cool. But if I'm being honest, the part when they unveil this big golden statue that then melts before your eyes and traps Smaug, I feel like that was a step too far. Just like Bomber and his barrel Beyblade action earlier in the movie, the stuff with Smaug being buried under all this gold only to burst out also just felt like a step too far, just a little bit too indulgent. They could have easily done without and just had him fly off in the middle of this sequence and had him exit Erebor earlier, which is exactly where this movie ends. We see him leave Erebor, and he's gunning for Lake Town, and he's going to destroy every man, woman, child building that exists down there. He's going to kill everything. He says, I am fire and I am death. And that's where the movie ends. And when that cut to black and the Ed Sheeran song started playing, I lost my mind in the theater. I couldn't believe that that's where they decided to end the second part of the trilogy, because it was such a cliffhanger. I had gotten so invested in the stuff with Smaug and was like, oh no, what have they done? They just unleashed fire and death onto the people of Lake Town, just like Bart had warned them against. This is going to go horribly wrong, and that's just where it ends. And I couldn't wait to see the next movie a year later. It was admittedly pretty disappointing, but I still feel like this movie holds up pretty well. Just like how the first movie was a pretty good first half of the Hobbit book, adapted in more of a Lord of the Rings style in live action. It was sure a little indulgent, and there's some things you could have shaved off. Here I feel like it was more of the same. It was pretty awesome. A lot of the things we got from the book that were directly adapted here, the spiders, the Elven King stuff, the barrels, Smaug himself, Bard and Lake Town, all those things I feel like work really well in this movie. But it also has some of the same problems that the first movie had too. Dwarves aren't developed nearly enough as I would want them to be at this point in the trilogy to really care about all of them as individuals. It can be a bit indulgent with the CGI. But all that doesn't really take away my enjoyment from this movie. I can still watch this and be completely entertained from beginning to end, despite a lot of its flaws. But that is not something I can necessarily say about the next movie, which I will be talking about very soon. But until then, let me know in the comments, what do you think about The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug? I think for me, it might be my favorite, just because it's the one where we see the most of Smaug and that character design, the way he breathes fire, and just the intimidating presence. I can't get enough of that dragon. I think he just looks so cool. But whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.